Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been in existence since the 1930s. It's simply known as the White Eagle Lodge. It has a relationship to the brethren and the unseen that provide a strong bulwark of light in London and Britain against the dark forces that were at that time assembling in readiness for the outbreak of war. We're also going to be learning about the spiritual involvement with the lodge by one Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is best-selling author of the Sherlock Holmes books. And joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is psychotherapist and author Morel Forrester. Morel, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, it's nice to be joining you, Daniel. Thank you.
Now, tell us, who is White Eagle?
He is the spokesman for a group of elder brethren, what is called elder brethren, in the world of spirit. He's our teacher in the lodge, and he brings with him the gentle personality of an Indian chief. And his name simply means wise teacher. And he took this name because he felt that times today, in these days, we are very separated from nature. And by taking this name, it gives off vibrations of nature and the natural world, and he thought that was good for us to be part of.
Now, tell us, just out of curiosity, because it certainly sounds this way, but is this a Native American philosophy?
No, it's not actually. The Native American philosophy, like all authentic religions, is based on something called the ancient wisdom, which is the fount of all proper religions. And this philosophy, the White Eagle philosophy, takes its teaching from there, and it deals a lot with the teachings of Jesus. Indeed, it takes its teachings really direct from the Gospel of St. John, not Revelation, but the Gospel of St. John. And it interprets this Gospel in a way that we really couldn't pick up from an ordinary reading of the Bible. It gives us the mystical interpretation behind the teaching, behind the words that we read. So, it also brings in the Buddha. So in answer to your question, it's really a lot of wonderful strands in this, including Native American teaching, Buddhist teaching, and principally the teachings of Jesus.
Now, I'm curious, as you were saying that, so how does how old is its philosophy?
Well, this is a big subject, but White Eagle does tell us that the ancient wisdom was given at the beginning of creation, that man has been around since the beginning of creation and has never been without teaching, has never been without leaders from the world of light.
Now, I'm curious, when it comes to something like this, is that, you wonder, so what is the purpose exactly of the White Eagle Lodge?
The purpose is to bring to ordinary people the vision of the spiritual life. We're all programmed to reach for something higher than what we experience on this earth. And these teachings, like many other teachings too, authentic teachings, is to enable us to contact that light, to feel it, to have a relationship with it. It shows the way to establish and maintain the light within us, because ultimately we're talking about light within us, not something outside us. And it also teaches that death is not the end, but is merely a return home to a greater reality.
So now tell us, how does the White Eagle Lodge accomplish its work?
There are various aspects which further its aim. I would think the principal one is meditation. It says meditation is very important because that teaches us that we have to find the light within. We can only do that by being quiet. And meditation is the best means for achieving this. And there's a beautiful little book in the lodge, in fact there are several, on teaching the practice of meditation. It also achieves its aim through service, which is accomplished through healing. And this takes place either with hands-on healing or absent healing. So a person can actually go into the lodge and have contact with healers and undergo a healing ceremony that way, or it can be done by what is called absent healing. You don't have to be there, but the healers will project their healing, which is done through rays of light, to the person wherever they are in the world. The other way it works is through an understanding of astrology, and this it achieves through its teaching in the White Eagle School of Astrology, which is recognized in Great Britain as one of the principal schools of astrology. There are Sunday services and lectures on White Eagle's teaching in the main lodges. That's in the UK, Australia, and in the US. There's a main lodge in the US also. Through music, there is great stress on the value of beautiful music. It brings harmony to the soul. And all these aims are furthered by workshops, retreats, gatherings, and special brotherhood services in various centers throughout the world.
Interesting. You know, it sounds really fascinating. It sounds like a sort of emergence, if you will, between Christianity and Native American philosophy. Would that be kind of a way you could look at it?
Oh, yes, it could. I mean, if Native Americans came across this religion, they would feel very in sympathy with it.
Now, I'm curious, is this something where it is suited for helping usher in, I guess, a new Aquarian age?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. The Aquarius is an air sign. Air signs in astrology are all signs of the mind. And so the Aquarian age is to usher in intellectual development in the world's population. And I think it's fair to say that we can see that now through the Internet. People are having to up their intelligence. You could argue in a certain way, but I think it is fair to say that the intellect is being sharpened and honed. We do have to make tremendous efforts, all of us, to keep up with this new age now. So that's one aspect of the Aquarian age. Apart from developing the intellect, the Aquarian age Aquarius is also a developer of the soul aspect in man, the intuition. And so those two aspects combined, the development of the intellect and the development of the soul or intuition, are what are the hallmarks of the Aquarian age. So that's what the Aquarian age is doing. And yes, the White Eagle Lodge is uniquely suited in many ways to aid in the bringing in of this Aquarian age because of its work and its teaching.
Now, are there many members to the White Eagle Lodge?
Oh, yes, there are thousands. There are centers now. It really took off in about the 1980s. There's a main center in Australia, many members in Australia. It's in Japan, Nepal, all over the United States, South America, Europe, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, Canada, and of course here in the United States. So it has thousands of members from a very, very small beginning. The work has really grown and blossomed, and it's very much in tune with what we need today, because we do live in very turbulent times.
Well, there's certainly no doubt about that. Tell us, why did you join the lodge?
Like many people in the lodge, I was at a serious crossroads in my life. It was 2 years after my divorce when I felt that the carpet had been pulled out from under me, and I was going to have to reevaluate the whole of my position in life. It's very difficult being left with 3 small children, and it did involve a serious look at my values. Things I had taken for granted were no longer working for me. So I had to work out and seek a way of life that had meaning for my new situation. In fact, what I'm saying is I could no longer be comfortable in the conventional way of life. I had to find something much deeper, something more meaningful, something applicable across the board to people who are in a comfortable way of life and people who are not. So that was how I found the Lodge, and I'm very glad that crossroads came into my life, because I found a much truer and a much more substantial way of moving forward.
So now, what would you say were some of the significant ways that this helped you that probably you weren't expecting?
It made me see that the character that I had, and it was a good character, was actually not enough. And I had to strive for an even better character. And you can only do this by studying the ego. You have to introspect. You have to go in for self-analysis. And you have to realize that the ego works in all sorts of ways that you don't realize when you're not actively involved in the path. For instance, if you get hurt by someone, just by something they say or something they do, if you're hurt, that's the ego. Because when you're walking in the light, when you're studying how to walk in the light, you no longer get hurt. You see everything in its proper perspective. And you see that the people who hurt you are only actually doing their best. And they don't know any better. And they don't mean to hurt you in the way that you feel. So that was a great revelation to me, the letting go of the ego. And that was probably the hardest part of me taking up this path. So you learn that when adversity strikes, it's actually not really adversity. It's because you perceive it as adversity. You're taking it in a negative way. And really the only way that you should take it is to analyze why it's affected you negatively and to then see it as an opportunity to move on. In other words, this path really is about a lot of self-analysis. So in the end, being hurt, having adversity in your lives are no longer taken in the old way, the way that the average person takes them. They are opportunities to look within yourself and to see them for what they are and move on and be actually grateful for them. So that's how it's helped me, Daniel.
You know, it's really interesting, too, because we live in a day and age that criticism seems to be the order of the day, almost to the fault of making it seem factual. I mean, here in America, we're dealing with that very thing in electing, our newest president, and the outpouring of this whole thing is, well, he doesn't seem to say perhaps the right things that people want to hear, and so therefore, they're highly critical of, this man's actions, and it kind of makes you wonder that if this one person can come into an office of government for the United States or any other country for that matter, and have such an outpouring of people who are upset with things such as hate speech and bigotry and just the whole slew of things, it kind of makes you wonder, has this person perhaps come into our life to show us that our skeletons are not only hanging in the closet, but they're ready to get off the hook and jump out and scream at everybody else? I mean, what's with all the self-righteousness?
Oh, well, I think that's very interesting. You've made that comment. I think that Donald Trump has been put there to show us where we need to go. So I think it's all positive. And White Eagle does teach us to look on all happenings in the world with divine eyes, divine feelings. And I do agree with you. I think there's an awful lot of criticism today. People are very ready to jump in and criticize. And that's all part of the intellectual development. This is the way I see it. It's all part of the aspect of the Aquarian age, bringing in intellectual development. And as yet, there's not a strong manifestation of the soul development, which would give us a much more tolerant and forbearing approach to what's currently happening in the world. That is yet to come, I feel. But it's very interesting what you're saying just now in the current situation in America. And if we could just see it all as a mirror reflecting our own actions, we perhaps might not be so ready to jump into this way of being so ready to be critical.
I remember having a brief conversation with a person as Donald Trump was elected president, and they were just up in arms. I live in Portland, Oregon, and we've had a lot of retaliation and of course marches and so forth. And I remember asking, so what upsets you the most about him being elected president? And so this person just rattled off a whole litany of things, and so I just simply stood there for a bit. And they got upset and said, well, so what, did you vote for Donald Trump? And I said, well, yeah, sure, why not, And I said, so of all these things that you don't like about Donald Trump, and most of them just had to do with things that he said. There wasn't anything that Donald Trump had done that upset this person. It was just basically what he said, things such as hate speech and so forth. And I said, so of those things that you just told me, what are you doing about it?
Right.
And they just kind of stood there, well, I'm just upset and I'm marching. And I said, but that doesn't accomplish anything.
Yes.
What are you doing about the things you don't like about Donald Trump? What specifically are you doing about it? And, most people don't have an answer for that. It's easy to point their fingers out and show what the problem is. They don't realize they've got three fingers pointing back at them, saying, look, you're 3 times more responsible for the thing you're upset about this other person about.
Well, I think it's an age, a time of opinions. People like to have opinions. But there is a beautiful saying by a Chinese sage, and I think he's quoted by White Eagle, and he says, do not seek the truth. This is a Chinese sage speaking. Do not seek the truth. Rather seek not to cherish opinions. And that's a teaching that I have found so very, very useful, because it's in the cherishing of opinions that we veil the truth from ourselves. So to go back to what I said earlier, we have to look on all happenings in the world with divine eyes, with divine feelings, and see it all as meant as an opportunity for us to evolve and move on, and not to be caught up in the present moment.
Now, as I was opening up the program earlier, we talked about author Sir Conan Doyle. Now, tell us what his contributions to this were like.
Well, Conan Doyle was a very interesting person, and he was very, very psychic, and he became, as well as writing all those books, he became the leader of the spiritualist movement in Britain in the early part of the century. The spiritualist activity basically puts a person in touch with their relatives who have moved out of the body. So that's very comforting for the people left on Earth. Grace Cook was a spiritualist to begin with, before White Eagle, when she was about 20, said they had more important work to do, and she was to use her talents for founding a church. Now, Conan Doyle heard about Grace Cook, not through the spiritualist movement, I don't think, or maybe, I'm not sure. And he very much wanted to meet her and to learn what this new movement was that she was establishing. So he invited her over to his house with his wife, Lady Conan Doyle, for tea one day. But before that happened, he became very ill, and he passed on. In the state of the beyond, he was still interested in what she was doing, and in fact, he wanted to help her. So she came for tea, and in that tea time, he channeled to her directly Grace Cook, because she had these amazing abilities, teachings from the world beyond. And he said it was a much pleasanter place than people on the earth believed, and it was all much easier to reach. And he gave her these teachings, which have now been incorporated into the formal teachings of the Lodge. And so he was a great help in establishing the founding of the Lodge. Now, I've got another little story about Conan Doyle before he died. This is when he was younger and well, and his wife was entertaining a friend of hers to tea, and this friend brought a little girl. And the girl got bored with the ladies' talk in the drawing room, so she let herself out of the door and wandered around the ground floor of this rather big house. And she came to Conan Doyle's study, his office, and opened the door and went in. And Conan Doyle turned round in his chair and looked at her and asked her what her name was and where she lived. And then he said to her, "Would you like to see some fairies and little people?" And the little girl, of course, wide-eyed, said, "Yes, I would." So he took her into his garden, and after a few minutes, the little girl saw fairies and elves dancing all over the garden, in amongst the flowers and on the lawn. So that gives you some idea of the abilities of Conan Doyle. And we know this story because that little girl, when she grew up, became a writer, and she recorded that incident in one of her books. I don't know the name of her, but it's made its way into the annals of the history of the lodge. It's a very beautiful story. And in the writing, I may say, of the detective stories, Sherlock Holmes, he meant to give his character, Sherlock Holmes, that psychic ability. That was what helped Sherlock Holmes, discover who the murderer was in those cases. And that was portrayed in the early renderings of those books into the plays. I think it was Jeremy Brett who played in one of the early series. But in the later ones, that doesn't come over at all. They've completely lost that because that's the nature of modern television, I think. They don't pay heed to this rather wonderful magical aspect of many, many things, not just the Conan Doyle mysteries. So that's a little bit of the background of Conan Doyle's involvement in the development of the White Eagle work.
I also understand, too, that it was important to understand the living word of St. John, who accordingly was someone who actually had direct knowledge and experience of Jesus Christ. Tell us about that.
Yes, White Eagle, the being White Eagle, has actually had many, many incarnations as a leader of humanity. He had one incarnation as a leader in Egypt, one of the chief priests in Egypt. He also had an incarnation as John, the beloved, the disciple that Jesus loved, and probably the most evolved of all the disciples. In fact, I'm sure that that's correct. He had a lot of the same abilities that Jesus came into that life with. And he went with Jesus to many of the places Jesus went with. He was with them right at the end. So this being that takes the name of White Eagle for this work is a very, very wonderful high being. And in fact, I understand from some of White Eagle's more secret teachings that White Eagle himself is associated with the Master Saint-Germain. So it's a very wonderful phenomenon, the whole of this White Eagle work that we have been given. And White Eagle himself is a very, very wise teacher with much experience of the earth. He himself knows the difficulties that we all have to go through on the earth. Since he's taught many, many times before as a very high teacher, he can help us greatly. And it's interesting he has not chosen to incarnate physically for this teaching, but he's giving it to us behind the veil. In fact, it's all finished now. When Grace Cook passed on about in the 1980s, the teaching finished, but there was a huge body of teaching given. The compendium of all the teaching goes into 2 huge volumes. So he felt his work was finished, and he doesn't teach through anybody else. So that is a little bit of the history of this great being, White Eagle. That's all I can give you. He's obviously got much, much many, many more lives behind him, of which I know very little about. But we know enough. The fact that he was a teacher among the Native Americans in Peru, that's the life he refers to when he gives us this bit of history. And then in some of the books he refers to his life in Egypt, and then he certainly refers to his life as St. John with Jesus, because the basis of this work, the Bible of the White Eagle work today, is the book called The Living Word of St. John. And you can find this all on the website, which is www.whiteeaglelodge.org. There's only one E. And you'll find a lot of what I'm talking about there on the web.
Now, when people become interested, what are usually as a reason they come to want to embrace this work of White Eagle and the White Eagle Lodge?
Well, I think people have different reasons, but I suspect most people have the same experience that I had, which is that they've arrived at a serious crossroads of their lives. And they go to the churches like I did, because that had been my religion of my childhood. I was brought up in the Church of England. And so I think they go to the churches and they talk to the priests, as I did, and they probably don't get the serious answers that they're looking for. They don't find the meaning, the ultimate meanings to life, a meaning that gives them confidence to move forward on that conventional Christian path. That conventional path is no longer suitable, so they try lots of other things. They've tried Buddhism, Sufism, maybe Islam, because Islam too is very beautiful. That's the Sufi part of it. And many of them end up in this work, the White Eagle Lodge work, because that is so aligned to Christianity. So many people from the Church of England or even the Roman Catholic Church find that the White Eagle work is very suitable for them. They like it very much. So that's how they end up there, as I did.
Very good. I first of all want to thank you for taking the time to share this with our listeners here. Very fascinating stuff here. Is there, you gave a website out earlier. Is that where people can find out more about this?
Yes, I'll just give it again. They can either Google White Eagle Lodge work, or they can go directly to the website, which is www.whiteeaglelodge.org. There's not two E's in the middle, so you have to be careful to type in whiteeaglelodge.org.
Very good. Morel, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It's been a pleasure.
And I might say, Daniel, I've got my own site for anybody in Portland who wants to come to our meetings locally, and they'll find that under my site, which is ringingcedarslifecoaching.com. That's my website. And through that, they can get in touch with me and find out where we meet in Portland.
Very good. Thank you again for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.